This podcast follows an active, unsolved murder case. This investigation is happening in real time. All individuals are innocent until proven guilty by a court of law. In May of 1996, a beloved 73-year-old woman and active community member disappeared into the night after playing a game of pinochle. 3 decades later, her case remains open and unsolved. Welcome to Hazel's Last Hand, a real-time investigative podcast. I am your host, Kate Colvin. In partnership with Hazel's family, we are looking back into the case, speaking to the community members, the individuals involved in the search and rescue efforts, as well as the detectives who have worked the investigation over the years. Before we jump into today's episode, we are proud to announce our official partnership with Break the Case, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting unsolved homicide investigations and advocating for victims and their families. Through this meaningful partnership, Break the Case is now accepting donations for Hazel's official reward fund. Here's what you need to know about where your money goes. 100% of every single dollar donated goes directly toward the reward fund for information leading to a successful resolution in Hazel's case. Our goal is simple. After decades of waiting, we hope this reward will encourage anyone with information to finally come forward and bring Hazel's family the answers they deserve. Justice should not have an expiration date, and coming forward with information should not feel like a risk. 30 years is a long time to hold on to a secret. Sometimes a financial safety net is exactly what it takes to encourage someone to step out of the shadows. This fund isn't just about a dollar amount. It's a message to whoever holds the truth that this community is serious about finding the answers, and we are also willing to back it up. We are incredibly grateful to Break the Case and to our community for stepping up to support this effort. To donate, just follow the link in our show notes. In the drop-down menu asking where you would like to donate, select the Hazel Martin Reward Fund. We are also excited to announce that the Reward Fund has officially been established with its first donation and podcast sponsorship. Our inaugural sponsor is Ellie Helbling. A Potlatch native, Ellie is not only supporting this effort financially, but also serving as a research and editing assistant for the podcast. Through her work at Latah Realty, Ellie has always valued connecting and giving back to the community. When she learned about this project, she was eager to find a meaningful way to support our pursuit of justice for Hazel. Thank you, Ellie, for believing in this mission and helping us take this crucial first step. If you're looking for a real estate agent in Latah County who is truly willing to have your best interest at heart, you can find Ellie's contact information in our show notes. And to everybody else who has reached out asking how to help, thank you. Your encouragement, your generosity, and your belief that Hazel deserves justice continue to move this mission forward. To truly understand this crime, you first need to understand the people, the area, and the community. In 1996, I was 10 years old, growing up alongside Hazel's great-grandchildren. We lived across 5 very small towns: Potlatch, Onaway, Hampton, Princeton, and Harvard. Together, they made up the Potlatch School District. With all of those towns combined, I still only had roughly 50 people in my graduating class. Here is Jacob, Hazel's great-grandson.
Growing up in a small town was something special. We knew all our neighbors and everyone at school, and there was a comfort in that kind of closeness. We spent our days riding bikes to the swimming pool, playing baseball, and fishing at the river until it was time to head home. The only rule we really had to remember was to be home by dark. Back then we felt safe in a way that was hard to explain now. We were hardly aware of the crime or cruelty that existed beyond our little community. Looking back, I realize how blessed we were to grow up surrounded by simple joys, familiar faces, and a place that truly felt like home.
50 people in a graduating class. It's hard for outsiders to picture, but to understand how that happens, you need to look at the layout of these 5 communities. We are strung along State Highway 6 in the upper reaches of the Palouse River. As you drive east, the landscape shifts dramatically, transitioning from the rolling open wheat fields of the wider Palouse region to a dense forest of white pine and Douglas fir. The anchor of our district is Potlatch, with a population hovering just over 800 people. It's the largest town in our immediate cluster. Potlatch was founded in 1906 as a landmark company town for the Potlatch Lumber Company, which operated what was once known as the largest white pine sawmill in the world. It sits right where the agricultural valley meets the deep northern woods, positioned just off of Highway 95, where Highway 6 branches off to the east to connect the rest of our communities. Its history is still stamped deep into the grid of our historic worker homes. Right on the eastern border of Potlatch sits Onaway, home to about 260 residents. Onaway sits on the higher ground just above the river flats. Historically, it grew as an independent counterweight to Potlatch, a place where businesses, shops, and even saloons could operate outside of the strict corporate rules of the nearby logging company. Today, it's a quiet and scenic spot where residential yards blend right into the pine pastures and dirt back roads. Following Highway 6 further east, you'll hit Hampton, the very heart of our story. Now, Hampton isn't even listed on the modern census maps, but it's a beautiful stretch of meadows and open floodplains that serves as a scenic bridge between towns. Then you arrive in Princeton. While the town's immediate core is incredibly tiny, the wider rural zip code connects over 1,000 people living on family homesteads and active farmlands. Geographically, Princeton sits quietly on the low valley flats of the upper Palouse Basin, completely ringed by steep, timbered ridges. Finally, furthest to the east is Harvard, with a population of under 200 people. This is where the logging country truly takes over and the terrain gets rugged. Harvard sits right at the base of the mountains, acting as the ultimate jumping-off point for the deep wilderness of the White Pine Drive. 5 distinct spots on a map, but back in 1996, they all bled into one another. Needless to say, everyone knew everyone. We shared one school district, one grocery store, and a total lack of secrets. It was exactly that kind of place. But just because we were a small community did not mean that we were empty. State Highway 6 wasn't just a quiet country road connecting our 5 towns. It was the lifeblood and main commercial corridor for the entire region. Day and night, it was alive with movement. You couldn't look out of a front window in Hampton or Princeton without hearing or seeing the deep rumbling engines of massive logging trucks. They hauled heavy loads of white pine and Douglas fir right through the heart of our valley, roaring past family homesteads on their way to the mills. And then, of course, there was the seasonal rush. Every weekend, especially as the weather warmed up, locals and outsiders alike would pack up their gear and head east. Highway 6 was the only way to get deep into the woods of White Pine Drive, or to load up the campers for a weekend of swimming and camping at Laird Park. Because of that, the highway became sort of a paradox. It kept us connected to the rest of the world, but it also meant a steady stream of strangers was always rolling right through our backyards. In a place where everyone noticed a new car or an unfamiliar face, Highway 6 was one giant blind spot where someone could pass through completely unnoticed. And in 1996, it truly felt like a bubble of safety. We were latchkey kids. As soon as the school bell rang, we were on our bikes, storming the streets, or building forts in the woodlands surrounding our homes. If you've never seen northern Idaho before, look it up. It won't disappoint. In fact, it's so stunning that it routinely draws celebrities to nearby Lake Coeur d'Alene. Justin Bieber was actually just there vacationing with his family. Back in 1996, doors were left unlocked, kids played outside until dark, and community quilting clubs and card leagues thrived. Our community was a safe haven, or so I thought. Through my research into Hazel's case, I've since learned of other crimes occurring in that area during that time, to include a serial killer who targeted children that was operating right in our backyard and previously entirely unknown to me. But the human element wasn't the only unpredictable force shaping our region that year. During the winter and spring of 1996, our area was also ravaged by the historic Pacific Northwest floods. Fueled by a massive Pineapple Express weather system, heavy rains melted a deep mountain snowpack, triggering catastrophic flooding across Latah County. To give you an idea of the sheer scale of this disaster, the U.S. Geological Survey tracks stream gauges all over the state to measure flood probabilities. Out of all of the raging waters in northern Idaho during that storm, the Palouse River near Potlatch was the only stream gauge in the region estimated to have reached a true 100-year flood event. It set an all-time record for river depth and water volume that still stands today. And the impact right in our backyard, in Potlatch, Harvard, Princeton, was devastating. Because Princeton sits directly along the upper reaches of the Palouse River, residents there faced immediate terrifying rises as the mountain snow rapidly liquefied. Families were completely driven from their homes by fast-moving currents. State Highway 6, the vital main vein connecting Potlatch Junction through Princeton to Harvard, was completely swamped and broken by the raging waters. Traveling between these towns became physically impossible. Here is Brian Potter, our high school English teacher, to talk about his experience during that time.
The winter of 1996 is one of the worst I remember, and it was the worst ever in Potlatch since I've lived here for 34 years. We had snow starting in about mid-January where it started snowing pretty heavily. We already had a little on the ground, but then a week of good snowfall, and we got out of some school for that, and then the next week it got bitter cold, clear and cold, and it lasted for a week of that. We got out of some school for some cold days. I know I had to thaw out pipes under my house. Then the next week, the Pineapple Express came in and it got really warm, and those 2 feet of snow that we had on the ground here in Potlatch and the snow up on the hills around, it all melted within that week, and we just had terrible flooding that made Potlatch kind of an island. You couldn't get to Moscow on Highway 95 because the flooding down at the Y, and you could get to Princeton, but if you were willing to drive through the deeper water that wouldn't get into your engine on Highway 6, and you could get into Moscow if you were willing to risk the bridge that was being threatened and go out Rock Creek and then take the cutoff over to Flanagan Creek and go over Moscow Mountain that way. But it was, we got out of quite a bit of school those 2 or 3 weeks, and then we had it, because Idaho has this law that you have to go to school for so many minutes a day, instead of making up days for the snow days, rain days, all that we took, they just added about 5 minutes to every day for the rest of the year so that it didn't change the length of the school year. But yeah, that was a strange one for sure.
Down the road, Potlatch essentially became an island. U.S. Highway 95 from the Potlatch Junction down to Moscow was closed due to deep water and floating debris. With roads blocked in every direction, the entire town was isolated. The ground was so saturated that massive mudslides tore down the terrain, burying and erasing miles of roads and trails surrounding the community. Even the infrastructure that defined our area took a permanent blow. The Washington, Idaho, and Montana railway line ran right through the heart of Potlatch and Princeton out to Harvard. In 1996, floodwaters severely damaged the rail fills and completely washed out bridges on the eastern end of the line. The destruction was so extensive that railroad operators ultimately abandoned the tracks beyond Harvard, permanently shrinking a piece of our logging history. It was against this chaotic backdrop of natural disaster, hidden dangers, and a changing small-town landscape that Hazel vanished. When search teams initially went out to look for her, They were fighting against an environment that had just been completely rewritten by water just months earlier. As we will discuss in the upcoming episodes, Hazel vanished on May 17, 1996. For nearly a year, it was treated strictly as a missing persons case, until May 5th of 1997, when partial remains were discovered and confirmed to belong to Hazel. Shortly after that devastating discovery, it felt to both the family and the community that Hazel's case simply went cold. While she lived on every single day in the memories of those who loved her, her file was tucked away in a drawer, seemingly forgotten. Until now. To understand the catalyst for reopening this story, we have to look back at a different, more recent tragedy in our community. Just a short 20-minute drive south down Highway 95 sits Moscow, Idaho. While Potlatch and our surrounding timber towns are quiet and steady, Moscow is the major hub that we all rely on. It's where we go for grocery runs at Winco, doctor appointments, or the daily commute to work for many. But this entire geographic pocket, known as the Palouse, is defined by a massive, interconnected college culture. Right on the western edge of Moscow, the Idaho state border meets Washington, and just 8 miles across that line sits Pullman, Washington, home to Washington State University. Between the University of Idaho and WSU, you have two massive pacemakers driving the region. While the universities are in session, these two neighboring towns become a bustling, energetic engine of over 55,000 people. But when summer hits, or the students head home for a break, the population plunges dramatically, transforming the area back into a quiet, sleepy Pacific Northwest landscape. It is a community deeply accustomed to a transient population of young people, making it feel both vibrantly alive and completely safe. Which is exactly why what happened next shattered the entire region's sense of security. As most of you will remember, in November of 2022, the University of Idaho experienced an unimaginable horror with the brutal off-campus murders of 4 students: Ethan Chapin, Xana Kernodle, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Goncalves at their home on King Road. At that time, I was working at the University of Idaho. My office sat a mere half of a mile from the King Road house. I watched firsthand as massive, relentless law enforcement efforts spun into motion. The Moscow Police Department, the Idaho State Police, and the FBI poured unprecedented resources, cutting-edge digital forensics, and hundreds of investigators into the case, ultimately leading to the arrest of Brian Kohberger. As a community member, I was incredibly thankful for that fierce dedication to justice. But I couldn't help but ask myself a haunting question. What if? What if the same level of public attention, the same advanced technology, and the same urgent willingness for the public to speak up had existed back when Hazel was murdered? Would her case have been solved decades ago? That question sat heavily with me for a few years. Finally, in August of 2025, driven by curiosity about where her case stood, I filed an Idaho Public Records Act request. In my letter, I cited the Idaho Public Records Law and formally requested access to any public records relating to the investigation of Hazel Martin, who was last seen on May 17, 1996 in Princeton, Idaho. I specifically asked for investigative reports, summaries, or case files that were not exempt under the law, alongside any photographs, witness statements, or any evidence logs that could be released to the public. I received a response from Latah County much quicker than I had anticipated, and the request was flatly denied. Their response read as follows: Good afternoon. Due to this being an active case, your request has been denied after being reviewed by the Latah County Prosecutor's Office. They attached the legal statute, pointing to specific exemptions, stating that law enforcement records are being kept confidential if disclosing them would deprive a person of a right to a fair trial, or disclose sensitive investigative techniques and procedures. To be honest, I was stunned. In the eyes of our community, this case had been dead cold for 30 years. Why would her file still be classified as an active case? And then it hit me. because it's still solvable. I sat on that realization as 2025 drew to a close and 2026 arrived. Officially marking 3 full decades without Hazel and 3 decades without answers. I realized that if Latah County couldn't release the files to us, I would have to go out and find the information myself. Thankfully, my educational background and professional experience in psychology and research lent themselves well to an undertaking like this. To put it plainly, I'm a stubborn woman who is deeply curious about the human mind, and I know how to dig for data. I reached out to Hazel's family to propose the idea of an investigative podcast to bring fresh awareness to her case. They asked me a very genuine question, one I would ask myself. Why? Why do you want to do this? And after we talked through it, they agreed that this effort was worth a shot. Here is Hazel's granddaughter, Bonnie.
Because so much time has passed, we are genuinely moved to learn that people outside our family still care about what happened to her. That continued interest means more than we can say. It reminds us that her life mattered, that her story has not been forgotten, and there still may be hope for answers. We have never wanted her story to be sensationalized or turned into something it is not. Our only wish has always been to understand the truth, why this happened, who was responsible, and what can finally bring our family some measure of peace.
And well, here we are. Through our initial legwork of simply pulling on old threads, revisiting the past, and scheduling interviews, I am incredibly proud to share that Latah County has already taken active steps to reinvigorate Hazel's case. As I speak to you right now, Hazel's case records are officially being digitized. When I reached out to the detective currently assigned to her file, he had explained that up until now, her case history consisted of physical paper notes, faded documents, and printed photographs. Digitizing her file will finally allow investigators to cross-reference notes, search data, and properly map out the evidence. It's the first step in assembling the puzzle we need to solve this crime. We have also submitted a specific request for information from Hazel's file to assist with our own independent investigation. That request is currently sitting with the prosecutor, and we expect that response within days. As I mentioned before, this podcast is documenting our investigation in real time. You are quite literally walking this journey with us as it unfolds. So hit subscribe and stay tuned as our weekly episodes drop. You might just hold the exact key that we need to solve Hazel's case. When I spoke with Hazel's daughter, Joanne, she told me something that sits at the very heart of why we are here. She said that she just wants to know why before she passes on. Together, as a community of listeners, I hope we can finally provide that answer after 30 years of silence. Before we close out today's episode, we have an urgent request for you, our listeners. We know that a 3-decade-old case isn't solved by a sudden stroke of luck. It's solved because someone, somewhere, finally decides to speak up. A detail that you think is minor or insignificant could be the exact piece of the puzzle investigators need to bring Hazel home. If you remember anything unusual from the weekend of Friday, May 17th or Saturday, May 18th, 1996 in Princeton or Potlatch, we need to hear from you. We are specifically looking for anybody who remembers any unfamiliar cars or trucks parked or idling near State Highway 6, Hazel's residence in Hampton, or the Princeton Grange Hall late that Friday night or early Saturday morning. Anyone who left town suddenly, missed appointments without explanation, or showed an intense or uncharacteristic anxiety or nervousness around the search efforts that summer. Over the last 30 years, someone out there may have made a comment, a confession, or a slip of the lip. Even if it was said decades ago, that information is still vital. Relationships, loyalties, and circumstances change over 30 years. If you withheld information in 1996 out of fear, confusion, or a desire to protect someone, please know that it is not too late to do the right thing. The Latah County Sheriff's Office remains the lead investigative agency on the case. You can reach them directly by calling 208-882-2216. If you prefer, you can request to remain anonymous, or you can also route your tip through regional Crime Stoppers. Every single lead counts. Let's find the answers that Joanne and the rest of Hazel's family have spent 30 years waiting for. All the contact information, along with the direct link to submit a tip, can be found right now in our show notes or by visiting our website at hazelslast.com. Hazel's Last Hand is written, produced, and hosted by me, Kate Colvin. Sound design by John and Holly Boswell. Research assistance by Andrea Rorick, Bonnie Scholes, Krisha Bunny, Paula Frazier, Whitney Dixon, and Ellie Helbling. Writing assistance by Brian Potter. This is a podcast for the community, by the community.